welcome to the Practical Woodsman. What are we calling it? We're calling it the Saturday live stream, or are we calling it the weekend live stream? The Practical Woodsman Weekend Live Stream. I'm Rut, your host. That's right. It's my genius which has brought this all into existence. Good to see you guys. I see a couple people there on YouTube, and I see some folks on Locals, and I see some folks on Rumble. It's all wonderful to have you all here with me today. I don't know about where you're at, but it has gotten very cold here. Yesterday it was like 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and today it's about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the situation I'm in. What's it like where you're at? You guys all chat at me, and I will see it here on my computer screen. Some of the things I want to talk about today. Somebody asked me about outdoor wood stoves, or like camping heat stoves. Not necessarily cook stoves, but heat stoves for the woods. And so I've got a few things here to talk about that. We'll get into that here in a second. G Huns there on Local says it's windy where he's at. Yeah, it is here too. In fact, what I think's happening is that my wind is going up, and then you're getting it because you're in Pennsylvania. Ian, windy and minus 10 Celsius. Let me ask Siri some questions here. Hey Siri, what is minus 10 Celsius in Fahrenheit?
Minus 10 degrees Celsius is 14 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oof. Oof. Ian, that's without the wind chill too, ain't it? Hey Siri, what is 60 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius?
That would be 15.56 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so 15.5 degrees Celsius here yesterday, and today it's about freezing. Keep it simple. We'll just say it's about freezing. So what do you guys got? You got anything on your mind? I want to start showing off these stoves here in a second, and talk about heating in general outside, and the difficulties with having something in a shelter that you can heat with. I don't rely on being able to create heat inside of my shelter. I rely on the insulation of my clothes, my blankets, being up off the ground, those sorts of things, no matter how cold it is. I was thinking today, and I'll share it with you. This vast temperature change between yesterday and today here, if you think about it, that makes for a much more difficult situation to be in and to plan for. So like this time of year here in the eastern United States, I would say is much more difficult to go out with skill into the backcountry and stay comfortable, even over, let's say, going to the Arctic or something like that. And the reason why that is because you go to the Arctic, there are no surprises. You know exactly how you got to be dressed, what you've got to take, the gear you're going to need, and everything. Well, this time of year here in the United States, because you get these really dramatic temperature shifts, you don't know. It might be 60, really comfortable weather. So I don't have to do the temperature conversion. Let's say really comfortable weather for a week. And you go out into the backcountry, and you've planned for that because you say, well, it's been so warm. And you get out there in the backcountry, and then suddenly, boom, the temperatures plummet. And you don't have some of the gear because you didn't think you needed it. You thought winter was over. So much more difficult, requires a lot more skill, I think. These vast temperature changes. I like it. I like it. Let me catch up with some of the messages. Mr. Bourne says cold starts at 17 degrees Fahrenheit where I'm located. That's when it starts, 17 degrees. Where are you? Whereabouts are you located? There, Jack and Ron Phillips. Good to see you too, Ron. Thank you for being here. Yeah, so I like these challenges. Somebody left a comment on one of the Practical Woodsman videos the other day. Said, why on earth would you even be out there in the conditions you're talking about? I was talking about being out in the backcountry in like nasty conditions. Well, why would you even go out there then? Well, I got to tell you, folks, you have not seen beauty until you've been out in the backcountry when it's nasty. The nasty weather brings the most beautiful conditions to the woods. New York, it must be upper New York, right? Ian says it gets damp here by the Great Lakes. Could be about freezing Fahrenheit, but so darn damp it chills you to the bone. Yeah, and then you get the wind chill, right? You get the wind chill coming up off that lake. So anyway, the most beautiful time to be in the woods, in my opinion, is when conditions are the most challenging. And I get the most joy out of trying to harmonize my approach to the woods with changing conditions like that. So I like when the woods are the weather's really nasty. There's a lot of challenges, and I like trying to learn how to stay comfortable in those conditions in a practical way. You know, I'm not going to take like a wood stove. I think I was talking about that in last week's episode of the podcast. I'm not one of these guys who's going to take a wood stove. I see a wood stove. I know you drove that thing there in a truck. You're not that far from your truck, a road, your house. And so everything, my whole approach to the thing is it's got to work with a mindset that I can carry it. I can carry everything that I need. And, they get some of these wood stoves down to like 8-10 pounds, I think. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've seen some of these wood stoves, these collapsible, like titanium wood stoves. They get them down to like 10 pounds, but that is still 10 pounds. And if you're carrying that 10 pounds, it means you can't carry 10 pounds of something else. I was thinking about, let me grab this blankie over here. Thinking about my wool blankets. I love my wool blankets. I might take a wool blanket into the woods with me, but they're so heavy. I mean, if you've got a proper wool blanket, this is a 5-pound wool blanket. That's 5 pounds. And it's not enough. You get down below freezing and stuff like that. This blanket is not enough. So it means that you got to take more stuff, more blankets. You can't just take this blanket. You have to take more blankets. So it's really, it comes with all kinds of benefits, but it's quite a sacrifice to take my wool blanket because I know I'm going to have to take all this other stuff in order to stay comfortable. And it's really just it's not the most practical thing to do to take a wool blanket if you got to walk 30 miles on foot. Quick announcement to you guys there on Locals, on our Locals community. I just sent them an email today requesting more time for our live streams because right now what they're doing is they're allocating only 30 minutes to me there on Locals. The problem with that is I want to reward you folks on Locals with a longer live stream. And I want to encourage people from YouTube and Rumble to join us on Locals. And so my intention is to have the live streams be open to everybody for like the first half hour, and then have the second half hour open to the Locals community only. So you can see why it's a problem that on Locals we're only getting 30 minutes, because on YouTube and Rumble, I think we're getting an hour or more. So I sent the Locals folks an email today. We're going to see what they say about that. And you folks on YouTube and Rumble, I'll keep you in the loop about that as well. All right, let's talk about these outdoor stoves. I want to tell you a story. This is a true story. Got your popcorn, turn off the lights, get myself a flashlight so I can tell this campfire story. True campfire story. There was a barn an abandoned barn way back in the woods that my brother and me and my cousins, we all played in when I was a kid. especially like on a day like today. You got the rain, you got the snow coming down and everything like that. We could go to, it was an enormous barn. And it was actually a barn that had belonged to a great uncle of mine. But it was just like this huge indoor play space that we had. And we would use it for like foul weather days. We'd go up there so we could still be playing outside. I mean, we're in the barn, but it's so ginormous that it's like you're outside, and the both sides were open, so both ends were open. So you'd still get the wind and stuff like that. Snow would come in. Anyway, I get to be a teenager, and I make plans with some friends of mine to sneak out of the house in the middle of the night. So it gets to be about 1 o'clock in the morning. I snuck out the window, and I went up into the woods to this barn, and I met my friends there at this barn. And I said, let's get a fire going. We were up in the loft, so we're up on the second floor of this loft, and this barn was made out of oak beams that, old hewn oak beams that were were definitely 100 years old, even then. But I went up into the second floor of this thing, and there were one of these up in the loft. And I said, I'm going to get a fire going in that bucket right there. And so I got a bunch of firewood stuff, and we got a fire going inside of this bucket up on that loft, and we had it sitting right on those old oak beams. And we got to playing around there in the barn, talking, and, I think there were some girly magazines that we had hidden up there and stuff. What do you reckon happened to that fire that we had in that pail? It was just almost exactly like this pail right here that I have. I'm curious. Any of you folks there on YouTube, Rumble, or Locals, can you predict what happened? Remember, out of concerns for safety, I knew I was smart enough to get the fire going in this pail and not start the fire right on the wood. But then I set this pail right down on the wood floor of that second level of the barn. Can any of you predict? G Hun says it went out. No, it kept going. We kept feeding it. And we were up there for like 3 hours. I kept feeding it. I'm just waiting just for a second to see if anybody else wants to take a stab at it. Now I'll tell you the truth. Well, let's put it this way. It's fortunate for us that we were only up there for a couple hours. Because when it come time for us to go back home and sneak back into our bedroom windows and go back to bed, I went to put this fire out. And when I moved the pail, the bottom had burnt out of the pail. And that wood underneath the pail was actually on fire. And it's a good thing I noticed that too, because that fire would have just continued to burn and smolder and stuff. And there was a lot of decades old hay and stuff inside that barn. We come very close to burning the whole place down. The moral of that story is, I should say that bucket, it was an old bucket. That bucket had been up there probably untouched for 50 years. But it was a little rusted, and that probably contributed to the fire burning out the bottom of the bucket. This is a new bucket. It survived. That barn still exists to this day. And, all of our names are carved into the wood of the inside of that and everything. And our markings are all up there. There was a staircase that led up to the second floor. We tore that out. And what we did was we created a rope ladder. And so that rope ladder for a long time was the only way to get up to the second floor. And our thinking was that was a safe space up there. We would have like water fights and stuff like that. And so you could get up there and then you could pull the rope ladder up behind you. And because we had taken out the staircase, nobody could come up the stairs. We had even boarded over the hole there where people would come up the stairs. But yeah, it was a really cool thing to have as a child. Anyway, the lesson I want to tell you with this is when you take something like this, or you take even something like this, like a hobo stove, what you want to do is you want to set that up off the ground if you can. So you can do that with some stones. You can do that with some legs. You could even put some legs on that. I could take a clothes hanger, for example, and I could create like a stand for that. But what I would do is, that would probably take fire for a while. It's not going to take fire forever. Eventually, it is going to burn out. And you just want to make sure that you've got that lifted up off the ground a little bit. Another thing you want to do is, if I were going to make this into a little outdoor heat stove. Now, remember, we're talking about heat stoves. These can double as cook stoves, but what I want to make sure you know is that the topic that I'm on right now is not necessarily cook stoves, like these little pocket cook stoves you could take, like backpackers take. My interest is in the heat of a stove. So you could actually make this little coffee can into the heat of a stove. By the way, I want to tell you folks there on Locals that if it cuts out like it did last week, if it cuts out all of a sudden on you, run over to YouTube or Rumble to pick up the rest of the show. As I mentioned before, Locals currently is only giving us 30 minutes on our group. I think we've got unlimited time on YouTube and Rumble. That hopefully will be changing soon. All right, so back to this. You want to turn this into a little stove. What I would do is I would come up about this far on the can, and I'd poke holes all the way around that with a screwdriver or with an awl. I would just jam holes all the way around that for airflow. And then I would set that up on like 3 or 4 rocks so that you would have space underneath of it. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow for plenty of airflow. And save these little plastic lids, because when you're traveling, you want to be able to jam stuff in your stove and seal that all up, keep stuff from falling out. But anyway, there's a good idea for a heat stove outside. Very cheap heat stove. This cost me $10 with the coffee in it. So you're paying for the coffee. And then the container just kind of comes along as a freebie on the side. Love things like this. In fact, I'm holding on to this pretty dear because I want to get it out into the woods and I want to do something like that with it. Of course, you wouldn't want to use that inside of a shelter. These are for things that you would use outdoors. Could I use this as an outdoor stove deep in the backcountry? Yeah, it's light enough, useful enough that I could do something like that with it. Now, I know a lot of folks that watch the channel live in places where you get fire bans, a lot of regulations regulating fire, a lot of risk for forest fires and stuff like that. Let's talk about that here for a minute after I read Mr. Bourne's comment. He says, I pack a hot water bottle and get all night pinpoint heat for 11 ounces. The hot water doesn't go cold in the middle of the night after 3 or 4 hours. See, the thing keeping me from that is I say the thing's going to go cold and then I'm going to wake up and I'm actually going to be colder than I otherwise would be because the water's going to cool overnight. I've not done it, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, about fires. I lived in Philly for a while, and so I did a lot of exploring in the Pennsylvania woods. And a lot of fire rings up there, a lot of stone fire rings. That was something new for me. because growing up, we never used fire rings. What my father taught me was to just use my boot and to clear away plenty of space around wherever I want to build the fire. And then we built the fire right on the ground. My whole life, this is the way we did it. I never saw a rock fire ring until I moved to Pennsylvania. And now I see rock fire rings everywhere. You know, they have their benefits, but they're not necessary. What really matters is clearing away plenty of space from brush around from your fire. If you can do that, you don't really need a fire ring. You'll notice a lot of my fires that you'll see me start are not in a fire ring. And some folks watching that might think that's dangerous. The fact of the matter is, that's just the way I grew up. We didn't use them. We learned how to minimize the risk of a forest fire by just clearing away a lot of space. Now, I will say, where I am from, where I grew up, we didn't have a lot of like pine trees. Didn't have a lot of pine trees. Now, if I go out west, where their forests there are like the majority pine tree, I could see where that could create some problems, because you get all those needles and stuff, season after season of pine needles on the forest floor, and they just take a minor spark, and those things go up hot and fast. So we didn't have a lot of trees like that. You've got to really understand your environment to know, is it appropriate for me to build a fire here at all? Do I need a fire ring? Do I not need a fire ring? Do I need to clear away the brush? Do I not need to clear away the brush? If it's been wet for weeks around here, I may not even clear away the brush. But what if it's been dry for weeks? Well, that changes everything, doesn't it? Whereas before I might spend 5 minutes clearing away a space for my fire, if I know it's been dry for a month, well, I'm not just going to spend 5 minutes clearing away a space for the fire. I'm going to spend, maybe even an hour making sure I, with my boot, clear away every possible bit of stuff off the forest floor that I can. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid any kind of ash or coal or anything that might pop out of your fire or drift along on the wind and fall and then start a fire. That's what you're trying to stop. Wow. Mr. Bourne there on YouTube says the modern bottles release heat very slowly. In the morning you have 2 quarts hot enough to make tea. Wow, I did not know that. That is daggum impressive. That is daggum impressive. One of the worst parts about waking up in the woods is that time between when you wake up and the time that you get coffee into you. I don't know about you folks. My brain doesn't start working until like an hour after I've woke up. And so when I wake up first thing in the morning in the woods, I'm always like, where am I? Who am I? Who are you? How did I get here? I need to get that coffee into me. If I could already have hot water, that'd be awesome. All right, so that's the conversation I kind of wanted to have about fire rings. I never build my own fire rings. If a fire ring is already there, I'm talking about like a stone fire ring, I'll take advantage of it. But otherwise, I just use the clear brush away with your boot technique for starting fires. I like to build them right on the ground. They get plenty of airflow from the bottom. And that's a problem with fire rings. Often fire rings will block airflow from the bottom. And so if you're ever out in the backcountry, you come to a fire ring, somebody's been there, they've camped or whatever, and you're having a hard time getting a fire going in that fire ring, clear out some of those stones so that air can get in from the bottom, and you'll see that it'll be a lot easier to build your fire. All right, let's talk about these things here. Here's a stove that I got last year, which you could cook on the top of this thing. Could you carry it backpacking? If you're a glutton for punishment, I reckon you could. What fuels this thing? What fuels this thing is the same thing that fuels your cook stove. So you only got to carry one type of canister. It goes right in there, screws on, and it hides nice and out of the way. Got a nice handle here with the curlicue at the top so that it doesn't burn your hand, stays cool. And this thing will put off a significant amount of heat, even outdoors. To give you an idea how big this thing is, there's my coffee can, and there's the stove. So that thing will put off a lot of heat. You know, you could set that there in the middle. Guys could be sitting around it. That'll keep you warm, even on a very, very cold day. Now, I would not take this into the backcountry. You know, this you guys hear me complaining about the tells for a person not really being out in the wilderness. I think if I saw this on a video, I'd be like, he's 50 yards from his car. So I don't think it's really practical for getting out in true wilderness. But that doesn't mean it's worthless. It might be worth your while keeping something like this in your truck, as especially in the wintertime. You know, you can pull off on the side of the road. If you need to camp by the side of the road, anything like that, something like this might come in handy. Don't use it inside your vehicle with the windows up. You want to make sure you only use something like this outdoors. What are you looking for? I mean, what's the price on something like this? I'm going to guess you could find something like this for, I don't know, what do you guys think? Any of you guys buy anything like this ever? They sent it to me for free to try, so that's why I don't know how much it costs. I'm going to guess $30, $30, $40. Do I think it's worth $30, $40? Yeah, I do. I mean, depending on what your lifestyle's like and what your approach to the woods is like. What I like even better than this are these little stoves here. This is stainless steel, and basically this is just a glorified coffee can, guys. This is just a glorified version of this. But it is stainless, it's robust, it's got this fake bottom in it that helps with the airflow. See these holes around the bottom of that? That's exactly what I'm suggesting with your coffee can. This thing, Ian says the little butane heaters are good too. Yeah, I know a lot of working men use those. I'll tell you what I like about this. It's got these legs built into it, foldable legs. So you could actually put that in a pack, in a bag, pack that in your truck or something, and then you don't have to worry, like with the other stove, you'd have to worry about this in the summertime. You don't want to store that in your vehicle in the summertime, it could blow up. But this, you're just using wood around the side of the road or whatever. So that's what I like about it. You're not dependent on purchased fuel because you can just use fuel anywhere you find it. So that's what I like about it. That the thing, it leaves you less dependent on the stores. Yeah, that's what I really like about things. I like gear that leaves you independent or free of dependence on going to the store to continue using it. See, you spend money on this thing, it's great as long as society is up and functioning, and you don't have any problem going to the store to buying more fuel. But if you can have another thing, if you can have something similar to this that requires no dependence whatsoever on having to get to the store, isn't that a more practical approach to the thing? I think so. And it does the same thing. You never run out of fuel because you just find sticks and throw the sticks in there, and this thing will put off a significant amount of heat. You know, and one of the good things about that is you don't leave a burn marks on the ground. So if you're trying to stay incognito or not, you know, advertise your presence somewhere, these sorts of things are real nice. Again, it's too heavy to travel any distance into the woods, but if you're traveling in a vehicle and then just camping out on the side of the road or up into the woods somewhere, these things would work really nice. Want to take this out onto a job site or something? I was just thinking, I got invited to this is a true story. A friend of mine who I just met a couple years ago, he invites me out. Okay, thank you, G-Huns. G-Hun says, locals just cut out. Yeah, that's the 30-minute limit that they've got us on right now, that it's not fair. So I think next week when we do the live stream, I think they will have replied to me, and I think we'll have more time over there. So my friend's name's Seth. He invites me over to his house. He lives out in the woods, and he had invited a bunch of other people out. I didn't know that. So I get out there, and he says, "Hey, you're the woodsman. Why don't you get us a fire going?" I kind of pride myself on always being prepared for any eventuality, being able to get a fire going anywhere. Well, the only thing I had was this little tiny, I had no matches or anything. I had the little tiny flint and striker. I had no tinder. What I ended up doing was I found some paper in my truck that I ended up softening up and using as tinder, and I got the fire going. I didn't get it took me longer, and it took more energy than I am proud to admit. For somebody who likes to fancy himself as being this outdoors, always prepared type of guy. But experiences like that are good because they show us where the weaknesses in our thinking are, the weaknesses in the way we imagine things might go down, right? So I it's embarrassing, but I like being embarrassed every once in a while, so I can see where the weaknesses are and I can address them. Trust me, I carry a bigger ferro rod now in my pocket everywhere I go, and I always make sure to have tinder. I also carry some other things that I wasn't carrying before. But anyway, the point of that whole story is there was like 12 people there, and it was a lot colder that day. It got a lot colder than I thought it was going to. I think this would have been perfect for that day because he didn't have a place for a fire. He's just like, get a fire going anywhere. So I did. But if I'd had something like this, it just would have been so much better, I think. And so if you keep something like this in your truck, it could come in very handy for something like that. And for its size, it's amazing the heat that thing puts off. So might be worth an investment in something like that. And from what I understand, they're making these out of titanium now, which is even better. All right, give you guys a chance to talk while I sip on my old Kentucky bourbon here, my weekend guilty pleasure, my Kentucky bourbon. You guys are going to start noticing on these live streams that I do the live stream on my off days. I'm not out to look pretty or anything like that. A really stripped down version of like the podcast and stuff like that. I'm usually wearing clothes that I wore the day before. It's my weekend, so very informal. These live streams. You'll usually see me wearing a hat because that's my excuse. That allows me not to have to take a shower on the day of the live stream or comb my hair. And so I'm all about that practicality. You guys talk to me. I see some folks there on YouTube and on Rumble. You guys talk at me. What are you guys thinking about? What are you guys doing? You guys got any trips coming up? Any new gear? Have you had any run-ins with Bigfoot? The old booger of the mountains. Previous episode of Practical Woodsman was all about how you don't need to be in a entirely enclosed shelter, right? I was railing against tents. Jihan's going to shore fishing this month. This is the month. This is the month when all the good stuff starts, right? Coming out of the long, dark winter. Well, I wanted to follow up on that discussion. So I got some comments on that episode. People saying, you don't understand. I'm in Australia, and you cannot go without an enclosed tent. And that got me thinking. If I were going to like the Brazilian Amazon rainforest, you better believe that I'd be taking a fully enclosed shelter. So there are exceptions. There are exceptions to my position that the best type of shelter is a floorless teepee. There are exceptions. And so I think I said in that episode that the only reason people want to be fully enclosed is for these emotional reasons. I probably shouldn't have said that in such a black and white and dogmatic way. Because once I got to thinking about it and I thought about going to the Amazon rainforest, I thought, there's no way I'm going in an open floored teepee tent because, they've got biting ants. The whole floor of the forest moves at night because there's that much wildlife. I even saw a video of a guy in a fully enclosed tent. He had these leafcutter ants come into his camp, and they had eaten away half of his tent. So it's not just that I would want to be fully enclosed. If I were going into the Amazon, I would want to be fully enclosed, and I would want to be up off the forest or the jungle floor. And that is not emotional. That's not for emotional reasons. That's for practical reasons. When you got these ants that can eat half of your tent before you're even, you get an hours of sleep. That's not an emotional reason. That's an actual legitimate practical reason why you'd want to be enclosed and up off the ground. Ron Phillips on YouTube says, many thanks for sharing your weekend with us. Recently acquired a firebox folding wood stove. Like you said, full is abundant. Is yours made out of stainless or is it made out of titanium? I think the ones you're talking about, they fold out like this, don't they? On all four sides. I've seen those. You guys remember that the very first episode of the podcast that I did for the Practical Woodsman, I dedicated that episode to a man named Rick Nagualero. And he was off in Europe somewhere shooting his videos. And every once in a while, I'd see him using something like this. And he would talk about fire bans and stuff like that. That's another thing. It's an adjustment for me. A lot of the things I talk about come from the perspective of somebody who owns his property. The woods where I grew up, that was in my family. We didn't pay attention to things like fire bans, and you can't hunt this at this time of year because we were allowed to hunt whatever we wanted to hunt on our property anytime we wanted to. It was our property. There wasn't anybody who's going to tell us we couldn't start a fire on our property. So we did, and I don't know if that's legally accurate. All I know is that it was culturally accurate. We didn't pay attention. We knew better than the people who were telling us what we could and couldn't do. And that was our attitude. It was an attitude passed on to me. So whether you agree with it or not, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what the attitude that I acquired from that, being raised in that background. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm just saying that that's the attitude that I got. So a lot of the things that I talk about on Practical Woodsman, every once in a while I have to adjust it. I have to adjust my opinions because then I hear back from people who watch Practical Woodsman or listen to Practical Woodsman. They say, "Hey, listen, that's not the way things work here where I'm at. I'm in Australia, I'm in Arizona, I'm in England," and I go, "Oh, I have to take those things into consideration." So if you guys ever hear me talking in like this really black and white and kind of opinionated way, um, and you think that there are some important things that I'm not taking into consideration, feel free, please, to tell me that. Uh, I will try to have the humility to take it into consideration in a serious way and not assume automatically that there's nothing left for me to adjust my opinions on. Jihan says I like the idea of hunting whenever I want. Yeah, I remember my uncle down the road. It wasn't anywhere near deer season, but he had a deer right in the front yard, cleaning the deer. It was like in the middle of summer, and we never paid attention to whether there was a fire ban or anything like that. Um, Instead, our elders taught us when conditions were good for fires, when they weren't good for fires, when you had to be careful with fire, when you could be more lax with fire. So this is passed down from generations. And in my culture, we have a real kind of a negative opinion of politicians setting rules on people who are living a lifestyle that they probably can't even comprehend. So it's not like it's completely devoid of humility. It's just, you know, it, if you growed up and you're like the fifth generation sheep herder, and a politician tells you what you can or can't do as far as sheep herding goes, and it's a politician. I'm sure he's got the best interests of society in mind and stuff like that, but you're a fifth generation sheep herder. Nobody knows sheep more than you do. Who are you going to trust more to make a decision like that for you? Your grandpa or the politician? Of course, your grandpa. I mean, you've seen how much your grandpa knows. He's passed that on to your dad. He's passed it on to you. So it's not like you don't have more to learn. It's just who do you put the most confidence in to know those things? And so in my culture, the Appalachian culture, it's kind of like a disregard for official authority and a greater respect for like passed down knowledge. And so anyway, that it's just something that I got to take into consideration. There's a lot of people out there. I'm thinking about this Rick Nagualero. Like I said, I think he would be out in Europe. I'd see him using a lot of stuff like this. He'd be talking about fire bans, and I'm just, when I first saw him using stoves like that, I thought there's no practical use for those stoves if you know how to create a fire on the ground and prevent forest fires and stuff like that. Um, and then there's another thing to take into consideration. It's in these various parts of the world. You can actually, if you start your fire right on the ground in certain areas, you could actually start an underground coal fire. Your fire set right on the ground. There's these seams, like these coal seams that run through the earth. And depending on where you're at, you could actually set something like that on fire, and they will burn for thousands of years. G-Huns knows about that. There's one out there burning in Pennsylvania. It completely destroyed a whole town, pretty much, and it's just been burning forever and ever and ever. Yeah, Centralia, Pennsylvania. That's what it's called. So, that's something I never had to deal with. Never had to deal with it. So, me saying that there's one way to do things and you never have to worry about this and that would be pretty obnoxious of me um, to speak in black and white terms like that when there's so many other realities out there that that I'm not personally have not been personally affected by. But anyway, I'm open to the idea that I don't know everything. So even when you guys hear me talking in black and white terms, don't take it too serious. Easy Easy Doc says I can get all on YouTube. Says I can get all the cold weather beauty I need by watching videos. I don't have to risk my life to get such. Well, I don't want anybody to risk their life. I hope I don't give off that opinion. I don't want anybody to risk their life. At the same time, suffering a little bit of inconvenience and discomfort, I would say, is absolutely necessary if you want to enjoy the absolute best of the woods. The absolute best experiences I've had in the woods were when it was cold, when it was rainy, when it was windy, when everything was working against me. Those are the most memorable and best experiences I've had. And if I had people with me, the best memories with those people, the best experiences with the people I was with. And, you just cannot grow in anything without difficulty, without challenge and difficulty. It's the challenge and the difficulty and the failure that allows you to see the weaknesses in your approach and your thinking. You know, there was just this guy, a younger guy, YouTube guy or a TikTok guy, who just died this winter out in Europe, I think. His grandma was worried about him. There was a snowstorm coming. She's sending him text messages. She's worried about him. He says, "Oh, don't worry, don't worry." They find him frozen like a popsicle. Now, when you come into a story like that in the news, don't just read the story and go, "Oh, that's a shame," and not learn anything from it. What you got to do when you come to those sorts of stories is you have to stop and put yourself in that kid's situation. You have to say, what was he thinking? Knowing what I know, what is it very likely that he was thinking? Well, I know myself that I've thought many times, I'm totally prepared for anything. I don't have to worry about anything. I've got the skills, I've got the knowledge, I've got a tent. What can go wrong in a tent? Well, you think that until the first time that any real wind comes and just rips your tent to shreds. And the wind chill is so debilitating. I mean, it tires your body out. Those really freezing temperatures, if it's only you and you've got nobody else to help you, it just sucks the energy right out of your body. You get to a point where all you want to do is sleep because you're just dead, busted, tired. So it's this situation where hopefully most of your failures don't lead in you dying. But how many failures do you got to have before you say, you know, even when I think I've got all my bases covered, I'm certain that there are things that I'm not taking into consideration here. Or I'm certain that I'm overestimating something here, or I'm underestimating something here. Those sorts of experiences where you can walk away and not die, but at the same time, the experience teaches you a lesson that you have overestimated or underestimated something about your thinking or your gear or your approach to the thing or your level of skill. Anytime you walk away from something like that, you come out stronger and smarter. You realize what to get rid of or what you need to include. It's just like my friend invite me over out of the blue, and I go over there not knowing there's going to be a bunch of people, and he's like, "Hey, get a fire going." You're the woods guy, so get a fire going. And I was prepared to always be able to get a fire going anywhere, but it took longer, and I had to put in a lot more work than I'd like to. Well, that taught me that, and so I was able to make adjustments then to what I carry around on a day-to-day basis. So any little thing like that that allows you to make an adjustment is a good thing. Let me catch up here. Discomfort now could save your life when things go wrong later, says Jack Bourne on YouTube. There's no limit to how much things can go wrong. You're daggum right about that. You're daggum right about that. Wind and freezing rain, two of the most, I think, dangerous combinations that I've encountered. And it's so much worse when you're only by yourself. You see, if you even got one person with you while you're working on the fire, that person could be going and getting the firewood. Now imagine that everything is covered in snow, the wind is blowing, it starts to ice rain. You just want to get a fire going because you're freezing. Now imagine that you're all by yourself. It's not as simple as just going around and picking up firewood because everything's buried under snow. How do you find it? You have to move your boots along underneath the snow until your feet come into contact with like fallen trees and stuff like that. Then you got to pull them out, make that into firewood. That's a bunch of time and energy that takes you away from actually trying to keep the fire going. So just having another guy or another set of hands, another girl even, I don't want to overlook the girls. Just having any help at all makes quite a bit of difference. And so that's another thing I was thinking about, that kid who died over the wintertime. He was by himself, and I'm certain that his attitude was like, I got this. There's nothing, that can surprise me. I got it all under control. And because I've been there, I've thought that too, and I got into trouble. G. Hunt says, I already told my buddy his job this month is getting the firewood. When you go out on a regular basis, you got a guy or a friend that you go out with on a regular basis, it's so interesting how you just fall into that. Everybody just kind of falls into their jobs. When it was me and my brother and my friend Jeffrey, man, we had it down to a science. We'd pick a camp. Here's where we're going to set up camp. And everybody knew what to do. And they all went and did it. It was so great, that arrangement. But when I go without them, nowadays, a lot of the trips I do are just on my own. So, and when I go without them and I have to do the jobs that they used to do for me, oh, it's like, I don't know, it's like trying to cook a Thanksgiving supper for 30 people all on your own in your tiny little kitchen. You're over here, you're over there, and you just don't know where to be. It's really a juggling act. It turns into a great juggling act. So, Jihan, that's a good thing. As long as he likes it, that's the way to do it. All right, folks. Well, we're about at an hour. To wrap up things here, let me just show these things off one more time. Wood stove. I think you can get these in titanium now. And as somebody else was mentioning, you don't even have to get the circular ones. You can buy them so that they pancake down. And then you've got one of these. These take your regular gas canisters, screws right there onto the bottom. Those are nice as long as you are dependent on society to continue providing these fuel canisters. Nice thing about these, endless fuel. You don't have to rely on anybody for the fuel. And the coffee can. And the last thing I will say is that I did send an email to locals, you folks on our locals group. Hopefully they'll get back to me here in the next day or two. And what I simply said was, you ain't giving us enough time for the live streams. So can you up the time to an hour? I think they'll say yes. And then when that starts happening, you folks on YouTube and Rumble, though I love having you there, especially Rumble. I love supporting Rumble. I want to encourage as many people as possible to join our online community and get that thing really hopping and having these great shares and stuff over there. And so in order to do that, eventually what I'm hoping to do is the first 30 minutes to everybody, second 30 minutes for locals only. And that's what I'm looking to establish here with time. So, happy Saturday night, everybody. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Stay out of trouble. Get on Locals there. Share with us whatever projects you're into or upcoming trips you've got planned or pictures of the past trips that you've taken. Share them with us on Locals. We want to see them. And that's all for me right now. I'm going to get off here and get the rest of my weekend going. Y'all take care. Thanks for joining me. Doop-a-doo-doo. Doop-a-doo-doo.